Will it work? Doing a pilot study. Pilot studies are an important step in your sustainability improvement project because it'll help you iron out any wrinkles in the implementation of your improvements, help you avoid stumbles, and overcome resistance to change. You should note that you need to start with an improvement that you want to try, but that improvement does not come out of the blue. It comes out of your earlier hands-on research using some form of sustainability audit, or from your secondary research on best practices to address the problem areas that your sustainability audit uncovered. Once you've looked at some best practices or eco-friendly products that will enhance the sustainability of your organization, you should run a pilot study on a small scale that is like a proof of concept before you spend a lot of money or make any major changes to your day-to-day operations. By the end of this video, you will be able to plan a pilot study, carry out the pilot, design ways to collect data, and develop a debriefing. So, what then is a pilot study? It's defined as a test, an experiment, a feasibility study, or a small-scale rehearsal. The key points are that it is small scale, allows mistakes, and can be scaled up to see the overall effect. In sustainability, those desired effects might be reduced environmental impact, such as using less energy, which reduces greenhouse gases, or reducing water, air, or soil pollution, which has negative effects on animals, plants, and, yes, humans. It can also be an improvement for employee quality of work or quality of life. Or the effects can be lower resource use, which not only reduces environmental impact, but also saves money, a big bonus to every business or nonprofit. With a pilot, you can estimate how much the savings will be when the ideas are fully implemented. So, how do you design a pilot study? Well, first, you have to list the steps to try out your idea, the new eco-friendly product, or process that reduces mistakes, or behavior that reduces resource use or waste. Next, select your outcome measures. What do you hope to see when you've tried out your product or process or behavior? Lower energy use or water waste? Less going into the garbage? Healthier or more sustainable behavior choices? Keep your design simple. Remove any unnecessary parts from the design. The real world is always messy, but your pilot doesn't have to show all the complexities or possibilities. Gather your baseline data. Baseline data is what is happening with your current setup. How many lights or computers are being left on in empty rooms? How much paper or food is thrown away? What choices are people making today? Then try your intervention. Is it a new product? Or a simplified process that you hope produces fewer mistakes? Or a training workshop, educational video, or signage on recycling, or healthy eating, or proper computer setup? Only use what you need to demonstrate your idea in action. One light bulb, one faucet, one computer, one person viewing the training. Collect data before and after your pilot so you can compare the effect of your idea. Create some data collection forms, we'll see those in a bit, that will make it possible to create charts that make it easy to compare the current with the new. Once you've collected data on the new setup, scale up to full implementation, all the light bulbs or faucets, or whatever you're doing, and see what the effects will be over time. How much of an impact will this change make over the course of a year? How much will it reduce waste? How much better will it make the workplace? How much money will it save potentially? When you design your measures, you need to think through exactly how you're going to go about measuring the sustainability improvement. Jot down what your improvement is and where, how, when, and how often you'll do your measurement. Sometimes you only need to measure the change once. Sometimes you need to measure during times of low, medium, and high activity. And you need to think whether you'll be doing all the measuring or whether you'll need to ask others to help you gather the results from your pilot. Let's look at each one of these. The first question is where you need to measure. On site, or can you measure anywhere? If it's an aerator on a faucet, you need to measure it on site. But if it's the amount of energy saved if you turn off a computer overnight, you just need to use the same type of computer as you measured for your baseline. In other words, if it's a laptop you take home, you can measure it anywhere. Another thing to look at is when you measure the change. For example, if you're measuring the amount recycled, you would measure at the end of the day. If you're measuring the reduction of waste from mistakes in the manufacturing of a product, like upholstering a chair or engraving an acrylic nameplate, then you would measure at the same point in the process where you found the mistakes during your audit. Now think about some of the changes you might want to make to support a more sustainable setup. How would you measure facilities or fixtures? Do you need to measure energy using a kilowatt or faucet aerators using a cup measure? Do people like the quality of light, the color and the strength, or the strength of the water flow? How would you measure a more sustainable product? Does it do as good a job? Do people like it as well? How do you measure waste reduced or recycled once you implement a best practice? How do you measure the improvement in a process? Does it actually make a positive difference in reducing environmental impact or improving quality of work? Does it still do the job? Do people like it? And how do you measure behavior? Do you need to check for several days or on several occasions to see if the behavior is actually changing? Do people like or resent the change? Remember, this is not a check whether the behavior sticks permanently. That requires additional work. This is a check on whether your intervention, the training, the signage, or other incentive, is producing a behavior change. Let's take a deeper look at how you're going to measure products versus how to measure processes and behaviors. Let's look first at product changes. Here are a smattering of the types of product changes you might pilot. LED light bulbs, aerators, recycling bins, or adding and improving signage. Computers, desktop versus laptop versus tablet versus phone. Cleaning products. Packaging, like creamers, individual serving versus large container. Compostable to-go boxes. Or healthier foods. There are two parts to measuring outcomes from product changes. The first part is measuring the actual change, measuring before and after trying the product. Usually, you'll measure the difference in output using a tool like a kilowatt, scale, or cup measure, measuring the amount of energy or water or resources used, or the amount of waste created. Remember, this can be a very small pilot. You can measure one item, or one fixture, or one day's waste, and then scale up to the annual cost for the product. Use cost whenever possible, especially if there are savings. Compare this with your original product to get the savings that you might expect. Here is an example. The second part of measuring product changes is measuring people's reaction to the change. Interview the person who tried it, or have a focus group with a small group who had tested the product. More on that in a bit. Measuring outcomes from behavior or process changes can be a bit different because you're not measuring once before and after the trial. You may have to measure more than once to determine if the new behavior or process is being adopted. Some examples of pilots might include a new process for shutting down computers at night, or a new training module aimed at explaining how to recycle, or why and when to turn off lights when leaving a room. To help you gather data, you should develop a check sheet that allows you to make physical counts before and after the change. As with product changes, you also need to interview people after the change to make sure they understand the new process, and even more important, to see if they support it. If they don't, it's not likely to stick. So, how do you develop the check sheet? Well, the first step is to clearly define what you will be observing or counting. Examples of this might be recycling success or the new behaviors. Next, you need to develop the operational definition of the problem, which is what the problem looks like in action. It may be one item, or it may be several things that you hope you won't be seeing if someone adopts the change. The example here might be used if you are trying out a new training program to reduce energy waste and want to see the effects of the training. You can imagine a similar check sheet to measure appropriate and inappropriate recycling. That is, recyclables in the trash or greasy cardboard pizza boxes in the recycling bin. You can also measure positive behaviors, like volunteerism. Then you have to decide when data will be collected. Will you be going around multiple times a day or at the end of the day? Make sure to design the form so that it is really quick and easy to fill out. Your data will be more accurate, and people won't object to taking the time to fill it out. The people filling out the form are very busy and don't have time to take lengthy notes. After you've gathered the data, calculate the totals in both directions. One tells you if there's a pattern of variation on different days. The other tells you if there are some indicators that are still problem areas. Finally, let's look at who is involved in the pilot. Sometimes you can run the pilot yourself, but often you need the people implementing the change to try it out themselves. You need to think about this whether you're piloting a new product, or introducing a change to their process, or asking them to change their behavior. If that's the case, you'll need to brief the pilot participants on the purpose of the pilot and the specific measurements that you'll need for them to take, what their role will be, and exactly what the change looks like, especially if they're doing something different. You need to stress the importance of measuring as accurately as possible. This will give you more reliable results that can be scaled up more accurately. You may need to provide training on any measurement instruments or checklists they will be using during the pilot. And be patient. You may need to coach them through some practice sessions or rerun a pilot if you don't think you're getting what you need. Finally, after this initial briefing, be sure you take notes on anything you noticed, especially the reactions of the participants. During the pilot, take notes as people are trying out the product or process or behavior, any difficulties or mistakes, and especially take note of any patterns you notice, whether when the process is repeated by the same person or by other participants. And be sure to take notes on any comments you hear as they try the new procedure. Let them know you're doing this so they don't worry that you're testing them. Whether you run the pilot by yourself or with a team, after the pilot, you need to check with the participants, including yourself, on their impressions of the results. Have a discussion with them, we call it a debriefing, to collect information on their perceptions, understanding, and their reactions to the pilot. There are several types of questions that you might include. Opinion or values questions. What do you think about the issue or change? Knowledge questions. What do you know about the reason for the change, or about sustainability? Experience and behavior questions. What did you do? What did you do differently? Questions about feelings. How did you feel when you were doing the new process or behavior? How do you feel about having to change? And background or demographic questions. You can also collect those with observations. Whatever you do, keep it short. By the way, you can also collect data with a survey. I wouldn't do that for a very small group, but it's an option if your pilot group is a bit cumbersome, such as employees on different shifts, or wanting reactions from customers. If you do the pilot by yourself, check with at least 1 or 2 people who will ultimately be implementing the change to make sure they appreciate and support the change. Making sense of pilot results. How do you display your data? Well, it depends on whether it's quantitative, numbers, or qualitative, opinions. For quantitative outcomes, ask yourself, what are you comparing? Take a look at your audit baseline versus the improvement. Are you seeking more sustainable outcomes, like reduced energy and water use, or reduced waste, or reduced greenhouse gases generated? Continuing with quantitative data, how much data do you need to collect? Well, if you're looking for trends, you should collect as much as is practical to collect. 25 points if you want to detect trends. That's not usual during a pilot, but as much as you can. If you're measuring change, then 1 measurement before and afterwards to detect the change. How do you display your data so you can easily see the results? Well, input it into Excel and create charts that make it instantly obvious whether your idea has worked the way you thought it would, or that you will know that you need to do something more or something else. Use a line chart if you are measuring over time. You will notice in this example also has a mean or average before and after, making the change obvious. Use a bar chart or Pareto chart if you have categories of data that you are examining. Be sure to order the data from large to small if it's categorical. For your interviews, or for any qualitative data, that is, anything that's not numerical, you have different choices. If you've tested your pilot with one individual, ask the debriefing questions and summarize the reactions. Include an enthusiastic quote if there is one, and set it off visually. If you have a focus group or survey, do a content analysis. Categorize your responses into logical categories and create a bar chart or pie chart with the results. For example, you might have a pie chart showing the percentage of people who know the reason for the change and those who don't. If you have survey responses with very unhappy to very happy responses, use a histogram bar chart. Now it's your turn to define your own pilot. For this activity, let's just focus on the design. Running the pilot, collecting the data, and creating the charts will be the next steps in the process. For today, let's just talk about what is the problem, what is the intervention, the training, the signs, the product changes, games, etc. And what is the measure? How long will you measure the baseline and the pilot? Here are some ideas for developing your own pilot. Of course, there are a lot of other options. Think of a pilot that you think would be useful for your business or nonprofit. Food, test a healthy snack versus an unhealthy one. Composting or wise purchasing, and measure the amount of food waste reduced. Water, add an aerator to one of your faucets. Use a bottle or a bag of sand in the toilet at home to reduce water use. Transportation, drive regularly for 1 week and make sustainable transportation choices for 1 week. Waste, recycling signage in your workplace or home, use compostable or reusable plates and utensils, or go paperless. And energy, light bulb changes, or behavior change or signage. Turn off the light when you leave the room. Those are just some ideas. Let's look at some more detail you might include in your design. Do you need to develop a check sheet? Here are a couple of ideas. The top one has a single indicator, comparing the baseline to the pilot. The second has two indicators, comparing the baseline to the pilot. Develop some debriefing questions for your pilot. Here are a few examples. Finally, briefly describe the kinds of charts that you think would work. We have covered how to design a pilot, how to measure the changes, and how to make sense of the results. See what you can do now.